This podcast is part of the Deluxe Edition Network. To find other great shows on the network, head over to deluxeeditionnetwork.com. That's deluxeeditionnetwork.com.
As a teacher, your job is to try to see the good in all of the students you teach and all the students around you. But what happens when you hear a tale of a student that goes to your school that could have done something deadly? You write an awesome thriller. Join me as I talk to thriller author Patrick Shattuck on this episode of True Crime and Authors.
Welcome to True Crime and Authors Podcast, where we bring two passions together. The show that gives new meaning to the old adage, truth is stranger than fiction. Here's your host, David McClam.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of True Crime and Authors. Of course, I'm your man, David McClam. Hey, if you guys haven't already, make sure that you follow us on all of our social media. You can find one link to a link tree in the show notes of this episode. All right, if you have been keeping up or watching your calendars, you know that it is once again time for another author interview. Let me introduce you to who our guest is. The fictional Dr. Bright's intimate knowledge of troubled youth mirrors my own experience as a high school English teacher in Manhattan. Furthermore, Christopher Vasquez, a.k.a. David Manning, one of the two youths charged with killing McMorrow, was attending the school where I had worked for 16 years when the horrific crime shocked the city. This personal connection to the story led me to take up this psychological exploration in fiction. In addition to being a longtime English teacher, I am also a dedicated writer. I hold a BA in English from Syracuse University and an MA in English from Simmons College. My short stories and poetry have been published in the Antietam Review, Smashing Icons, Lonesome Traveler, Paradigm Magazine, Fox City Magazine, and Evening Street Press. He is the author of the book Dawn's Web. Please welcome Patrick Shattuck to the show. Hey, Patrick, how you doing today?
Good. How are you, sir?
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for taking the time to come on. I really appreciate it. So let me throw this out here at the beginning. You are here by way of the fabulous publisher Genius Books. So
absolutely.
Can you tell us, I work with a lot of independent authors. I work with some authors that's looking at going into a traditional publishing site. From your standpoint, can you tell us what it's like to be working with Genius?
Oh, they're the best. They, right from the minute go, I had a few publishers and even one agent who were interested in the book. But Leah Booth, who was the one that was my contact in the beginning, just overwhelmed me with how much she really liked my writing. And she just made me feel like she loved what I did and she wanted to be a part of it. And she also told me, like, we want it to be your book. We're going to make some edits perhaps, but you'll have the final say in all of the editing. And I was like, all right, I'm done. That's you're the publisher that I want. And her husband, Steven, is fantastic, has helped me with everything along the way. I can't say enough good stuff about those Genius Media Publishing. They're the best.
Well, I can say certainly, because I've had the pleasure of working with Steven and Leah myself. They've been fabulous to me. I did an interview with LaDonna Humphrey, and they contacted me and made their roster of authors available to me, which is why you're here. So you're here by way of Genius Books. So I have nothing bad to say about them. I'm encouraging authors who want a publisher to go that route because of the fact that I'm hearing the same things, that they don't pigeonhole you. They don't say, cut this. They don't try to make your book longer or shorter. Whatever's on that page comes from you. And that's what a lot of the independent authors I deal with are concerned with. So I thank you for letting us know your side of that, but they've been fabulous to me. So, all right, so let's jump into Dawn's Web. It is a psychological thriller, but it is also wrapped in some truth. What made you decide to go ahead and write this book?
So there's a in the novel, there's a place in the novel where the main character is watching what's called New York One, and it's a news show in New York. And it's absolutely based on how I found this project. I was looking at it was on mute because I was trying to get ready, and I saw police dogs and body bags and right around Central Park, Strawberry Fields, the lake. And I was like, wow, I wonder what that is. But I had to go to work. So when I got to work, my principal looked like she was about as white as a sheet. She looked like she'd seen 10 ghosts. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Oh my gosh, it's did you see the news this morning?" And I said, "A little bit of it." And she goes, "Well, Christopher is one of the kids involved." And David, I didn't know all the facts, but I knew someone had gotten murdered. And one of the kids who went to my school was involved in the crime. And I felt like I was driving in the front seat of my life and I got knocked into the back seat. I was really like in a state of shock. And then I had to go teach, and try to put on my teacher face. And then at lunch, I went out and got a paper. This was sort of before the whole phone craze where you can just look up everything on your phone. I went and got a paper and I saw my student's face on the front page. And it was just that's what inspired me to write about it. I was just floored by it and kind of had to start writing about it.
So being that this was, a student of yours that you knew had interactions with, kind of reminds me a little bit of the movie Dangerous Minds. Coolio just passed, may he rest in peace. Is this something that once you saw that picture, was it shocking to you? Or was it something that was like, the way this kid was kind of going, I kind of saw that? Or did it totally catch you off guard?
So, and again, the school where I taught at was small. He wasn't my student, but he was in the school where I taught. And by small, I mean like 100 kids. So I knew who he was. But no, it totally caught me off guard. And the fact that he was 15 years old and accused of being involved with another girl who had stabbed this guy over 100 times. I mean, I'd be shocked if anybody did that to somebody, let alone one of my 15-year-old students. And I immediately was thinking, my God, when I was 15, I mean, calling girls on the phone was a big deal. Like I was scared of that, fitting in. Like, how am I going to, look cool or whatever? And this is going on with this kid. And it hadn't been totally proven yet. But as the trial rolled on, I just kept reading about it. And I just started writing down my thoughts about it. And then I was like, holy crap, this is going to turn into a book. And then I started writing it. And a friend of mine who's a published writer in New York City, I was telling him about it. And he said, "Oh my gosh, my wife, who worked at the Daily News, she's been covering the story. So she's involved in all of it. And she's at every court, every trial, every hearing, she's there." And I was like, all right, this is just too fortuitous. Something is going on here. I have to write this book. Look at this. And she met me and gave me a dossier about 5 inches thick of all of the court documents. So I was like, all right, I got this thing. I got to do this thing. And, mainly, David, the thing that really struck me was, and being a parent myself, was I'm thinking, they're 15. Why are they out at 2:00 in the morning on like a school night? Like, where the heck are the parents? And it really kind of angered me because, and I'm not blaming the parents, but I'm saying, look, especially if you live in New York City, you got to have your kids on a tight leash. You got to know where they are all the time. And I don't know, I felt very vacant inside about like what these kids' lives must be like.
When you bring that up, it's kind of like the day and age that you and I, because I think we may be around the same age, grew up. I grew up in the 70s, 80s, 90s versus today. Me and you both have kids. My oldest kid is 30. My youngest child is 13. My middle child in there is 20. I just look over the years, and you being a teacher, you can attest to this, how much the world has changed. So like you said, if I walked in my door at 2:00 in the morning, I'm having a come to Jesus meeting with my mom, right? We didn't even think about doing that. Now, covering a lot of true crime, there's a kid that had got shot several years ago. He's out with his friends at 4 a.m. in the morning. He gets popped in an alley. First question is, where's the parents? I don't like to victim shame the parents, but at some point we have to have some type of, know where our kids are. We have to accept the responsibility for ourselves and know where they are. I'm locking my doors, making sure everybody's in the bed at 12 at night. As a teacher, when you keep seeing this, knowing that the different world that we live in, we've got technology. Now our kids at 15 is more acceptable to things that you and I never were. They can hold over anything they want on the net. What's your thoughts about that as a teacher as you wrote this book? What do you think can be the end of that, and what can we do to help that?
As a teacher, my and everything you just said, I completely agree with 1,000%. My role as a teacher has changed. I'm not just the information giver and getter anymore. I'm much more of like a father figure to the kids. And I look out for them, and my lesson plans are, even the books that I choose are much more about like life lessons and hard things in life that they have to navigate on their way through adolescence. And it's a lot more talking about being smart, making good choices. So, again, yes, and everything you said is true. And like I said, my role has sort of morphed right along with this changing world, for sure.
So when it comes to your main characters in this book being Don and Xander are a couple of angry teenagers. I think Xander may be the worst, but Don runs a close second.
Yes.
What made you come up with those two characters, and does a lot of your experience go into the anger? Because you can totally feel, the curse words that Xander's using. Unfortunately, this is typical of 13, 14, and 15-year-old kids today when you walk through the street. What made you come up with those characters and write them raw?
Well, and I didn't teach Chris. And obviously, Daphne Abdella, who was the girl involved, she did not go to my school. And as I started writing it, I felt like I met them in a few different ways with just my students, because I felt a lot of my students were super angry, or like she was actually a kid. Her father was like the CEO of some major companies. She lived on Central Park West, she lived on Fifth Ave, which is, this is where the richest people in the world live. And I'd seen a lot of my students, and they were like the richest kids in the world, but they were being raised by nannies, and their parents were not home. And I tutored some of them, and I would go to their houses, and you'd think you live in this palatial space. You own an entire floor of a glorious pre-war brownstone with like suits of armor from Louis XIV, but you're lonely and sad and angry. And I met a number of kids, and I guess these two characters just kind of like came together. They're sort of composites of a lot of different students that I've known.
And I appreciate the writing style. I read a couple of reviews on you, and everybody's praising your writing style. It's exquisite. I read a lot of books, as you may guess. I deal with a lot of authors that are thriller writers. And what I like in a thriller is that I'm able to tell the difference between one author and the next. There are some authors where you can't tell. It seems like they all got together. You're way different from that. And the thing is, you can feel everything that you're writing. And when I was reading, the book and reading about Don and Xander, I already got that feeling. They're rich kids, they got money, just the way that Don's parents would call up and talk to Dr. Bright. It's almost like, this is what we're going to say and we expect you to do it. I live in LA, a suburb of LA in Palmdale. I see a lot of rich kids where I go. I have a store that's in Beverly Hills. You've got 15-year-olds driving BMWs and Lexuses, but money doesn't buy everything. And in your book, you see that, these guys have everything under the sun. They've got money coming out the wazoo, but there's still something wrong. So I appreciate that you taking the time to write that way. Was it hard to write in both genders like that and keep Don and Xander separate as you go along?
No, because I kind of, once those characters formed, they became real for me. So all I had to do was let them talk. I didn't have to do much thinking. Once those characters came to me, I could watch and I could see their mannerisms. I could see what they would do. I could hear what they would say. And it just worked like I wondered, because I had written all poetry and short stories before that. I'm like, how the heck am I going to do dialogue? And these two just emerged and started talking. So I just let them talk and I wrote down what they said. And then I, love literature, obviously. One of my favorite books in the world is Native Son by Richard Wright. And that's also a murder story. And I was like, man, his prose is so elegant and lyrical and lucid. I want to be like that. And I noticed that his characters, it was like reading a screenplay. It just the sentences just rolled right into one another. And I was like, I want to do that. I want to have the writing be lyrical. So when people read it, it's I know it's not a pretty subject, but so hopefully the language can be beautiful anyway. The genders didn't really matter that much because, like I said, the characters kind of formed for me, and then once I had them, that was it.
So that kind of rolls into this question, which is a number of authors I've talked to said that once they honed in on their characters literally to them became a living, breathing entity. They woke up with them. They went to bed with them. They went through their day with them. If they're out having a cup of coffee or eating a burger at lunch, something may click in their mind and say, this may be what this character would do. Does that work the same way for you?
Yes, absolutely. And one of the kids who's Xander's based on was a kid. This is kind of weird. He was so angry, and I thought, all right, this kid, he's my Xander. Like he's the main guy. And then I involved him fictionally, of course, in this book where he commits this horrible crime. 6 years later, I found out he actually committed a horrible crime in Central Park. Not as bad as what happened here, but he was actually skateboarding. He had taken acid, and him and a friend beat up another guy badly and went to jail. And I was like, what the heck? It seemed like it was prophetic almost, but I knew he was boiling. I knew he was in trouble. And I really did try to help him. But you know what? At the end of the day, and I learned this the hard way, a teacher's a teacher. And at 4:00 in the afternoon, as much as I'd like to do more, I'm done. So then when they go home to an environment that's not stable, that's going to win most of the time. That's going to win because I've only got them for 8 hours. And then there's another 16 involved. But yeah, they are with me all the time. I'm writing a book now where I one day this voice just happened and I'm like, oh my goodness, here we go again. It's very different, but the character is with me all the time. Yes.
So the one thing I did notice, which is not a bad thing for me, but your book is about 239 pages. For some, what we call thriller snobs, the book is too short. They feel like that too much was packed into a very short book. Mm-hmm. What's your thought on that? Was it your intention to make your books this short? And do you prefer longer or shorter books yourself?
I really believe a lot in editing and trying to have the language be economical. I don't like to have a lot of fluff. And I just felt like, and I had it, David, it was originally 500 pages long. And I just went at it with a crowbar. I was like, a lot of this stuff is just like me. I don't know. It felt very self-indulgent. And I feel like with a story, you tell the story till the story's finished. And for me, that's it. And I know, and I looked up all that and thriller writers and people want more and all that. And I get it. But to me, that sucker was done. It just, I wanted to say what I wanted to say. I wanted to give all the characters their voices and end it.
Well, I'll tell you the same thing I told another author who went through this same thing that I've interviewed. I don't know if you know who she is. Her name is Kirsten Modulin. She's known as the Queen of Twist. She has all kinds of awards and all she writes is thrillers. Each of her books is between 200 and 240 pages long. I appreciate that. And here's why. I do a lot of driving. As you know, for this podcast, I do a lot of reading. I've read books that's 400, 500, 600 pages long. I enjoy those too, but they have their place. In a situation where somebody says, here, I need you to read my book, and it's 240 pages long, I know on average it's going to take me 2.5 hours just to read that book. I can consume that on a lunch break over several chapters than I can a 500-page book. So the way I felt about your book from reading it, as far as I've gotten so far, is she says the same thing. I don't like fluff. I don't want to put things in the book. I want to get right directly to the point. Your book did exactly that. When I started it, it jumped right into the story. I felt very connected. It is a page turner. So I would say keep doing that. If your book has to be 400 pages long, it has to be 400 pages long. But just understand, and I hope you do, that you have an audience like myself and hundreds of other people that appreciates a book that's 239, 240 pages.
And I also have heard, when you look up how long should a book be, there's all these different opinions on how long it should be. And a lot of it is tactical. And I read about making it more of a commercial creature. And I'm doing the little quotes with my hand because I don't really like phrases like that. And I'm like, you know what? I guess I'm not a commercial creature guy. I guess I'm just a writer because, if it makes a few bucks, that's great. But my art and what I want with my art is more important to me than, being like a number one bestseller. I'd rather do my own thing and not go along with all those parameters of success for people.
So in doing some research on you, I came across that Sarah Selects. I don't know if you know who that is, but it is a book club. It is hosted by the Amazon editorial director, Sarah Gelman. What she does is she looks for books that she loves and just doesn't leave her alone. And she starts to recommend these books to her book club. Your book was one of those books that she actually ended up recommended. And if you go to your Amazon profile up underneath, you will see Sarah Selects. If you did not know that and you know that now, how do you feel about that?
That's amazing. I'll have to look. I had no idea. And to be honest with you, when you asked me how great like it was to work with Genius Books, I guess I wasn't ready for the question in a way. It's way more than I said. They're both writers too, Stephen and Leah, and they really care about you. Not just your book. They care about you. And they realize they're an independent publisher so that they don't have like all the economic clout of like a Random House or something like that, but they do their damnedest to help you out. And because I know we were talking about LaDonna Humphrey, who's outstanding. She's so good with marketing. She actually spoke to all of us about marketing. And I'm 58 years old. Technology does not come that easy to me. I created a page on Facebook, and I actually bit the bullet and did Facebook. And all that happened was I got an invitation to my high school reunion. And I'm like, all right, this is not what I wanted. I'm sure those people are wonderful and I'm happy for them and everything like that. But some people know how to navigate this marketing of, media through the digital age that we're living in now. I'm not one of them. So if you tell me that Sarah selected my book, I feel like you want to talk about coming to Jesus. I feel like it's a miracle. I want to call the Pope. Like that's outstanding that happened. So that's cool.
Well, your book has picked up ground. You are a very humble guy. Before I even met you, when I saw your picture, I'm like, this guy probably does not even know what people are saying about his book, because you strike me as one of those people just to put out in the world and hopefully it does its thing. You've got a lot of fans out here, man. On Amazon alone, people's like, what a book. The twist kept them going from the beginning to the end. They need more books by you. Is there going to be a part 2? These are just some of the comments that you're getting. When it comes to
can you tell me, where do I see those comments? I'm missing it.
So yeah, if you just go to Amazon.com and look up the name of your book, it pops up and you click on the photo and all of your comments is right there.
Wow. Okay.
And
I have to do that.
I do that a lot when I'm interviewing an author, because I say, well, let me see what I'm getting into. I know what I feel about the book, but I also want to know what other people feel about the book to see if I'm on point or maybe there's something else. Very rarely, even with some of what I consider to be the top names in the independent game or published game, either one that I've interviewed, is that author carrying a solid 5.0. And you are. So what do you got to say to those people out there in Amazon that's reading your work and beyond and is clamoring for more of what you got to say?
I'm going to say thank you. And another one is on the way. But and another thing with my books take a little longer, David. I am also, like a full-time teacher. And so I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and I write from 5 to 6. And that's really the only time I have. Weekend time is family time. I love my family. I'm with my boys and my wife. I don't want to write. I want to go be with them. Nighttime is like homework and, listening to my son play the cello. And again, I don't want to write. I've got my family and I want to spend time with them. But it takes a lot. It takes a while, but the one I'm working on now is really cooking along. It's very different, but I'm thrilled that people want more because more is coming.
Well, let me tell you something from this end of things. Being that you are a teacher and educator, I have an uncle. His name is Eugene. He's also a teacher and educator. And my daughter had a favorite teacher named John Crocker. He was her choir teacher. The one thing I told her when she started school and all my other kids is this: if you find a teacher that you feel like cares about you enough as a person, hold on to that teacher. That teacher is going to take you somewhere. More than your book, I have respect for you as a teacher. I've done some research on you as a teacher. I found some comments, again, 5.0. No one has anything bad to say about you. They felt your curriculum was on a difficulty level of 1 to 3, which means to me is very understandable. A number of the students' comments that I read said that you cared. Even we talked at the top of the show, Lucy, who's one of your students, even took time to go and leave you a 10 out of 10 review on Amazon for your book. So I say that as a parent because I have children that's been troubled. I've had children that's had teachers that didn't want to be there for the right reasons. And being that you are, and you share this with your kids, and you have a love for education, as a parent, I say thank you. I know you guys don't get paid the biggest salaries. You have to want to be an educator. And dude, I thank you. I'm a better person for even knowing you. So thank you.
I'll tell you one fun fact is this is something most people don't know. I was actually a high school dropout. And, it was just, I don't know, it was a combination of a lot of things, but I certainly didn't have the kind of receptive teacher that I've become. And that was my goal. Like, what do you want to be? My goal was I want to be the teacher I always wanted. And if I've become that for my students, I'm a success, regardless of how many books I sell or whatever, that I'm a success. That makes me feel really good.
And I know that some of your work sometimes is done what I call in the blind. In other words, you don't see the immediate results. So I think it's important for me to tell you, even though you may know, but it's important for you to hear this from a parent who's had this happen. John Crocker is like a staple in my house. He's the one teacher that could pop up and say, hey, I have a concert, Madison, and I need you to come sing. And she would drop everything she's doing to go help him out. The work that you are done, the work that you're doing has laid a seed. That seed goes beyond high school and college. It goes into their life. So understand that everything that you've put out into the world is out there coming back at you. And I think you deserve everything that. So what is it that you would like people to take away from Don's Web?
Wow. Well, one of the things that Dr. Bright says to David is, there's no good and there's no bad with people. People are both good and bad, and everybody has their struggles. And I think a lot of that is what I was trying to say as well, is, Dawn, by the end of the book, you can see she is mentally ill. She has problems that are a lot just not her fault, and she needs a lot of help. But even she, I wouldn't say was evil. And even David or Christopher, I'm not going to say they were evil. They did something really, really bad. But to try to throw them away like sour milk and say they've done this so they're over, that's evil. I never want to sweep people under the rug. I think everybody deserves a chance for redemption. And in my mind, I'm not sure if Dawn gets it because I don't know if she'll ever get the help that she needs. But I'm positive that David in the book, or I'm sorry, Xander in the book gets it because he's working towards redemption at the end. And Dr. Bright has agreed to go and visit him in jail once a week to counsel him. So I guess that's part of it. Never give up on anybody, David. That's what I think I would say. Never give up on anybody.
So that I did have this question for you because reading the book, I'm like, that's my first thought was Don had mental illness. Mental illness is one of those stigmatized conversations that nobody wants to admit that is there, but it is, even down to the most horrendous of us. And that brings me this question to you. As you may know, Jeffrey Dahmer has come back up in the news because there has been a new release documentary on HBO about him. And his speech that he gave at the very end of his sentencing, where he admitted everything he didn't want no consideration. He did say that he didn't know if he was evil or sick and that he thinks that he is sick. Psychologists have said that he was sick, as well as his attorney. Do you feel that Jeffrey Dahmer could have been mentally ill to that point of the heinous crimes that he did, which he said because of his illness, he had no way of stopping himself? And when he was taken out, it's come out now in the news that his last words to the guy who killed him was, after he got knocked down the first time, was, "Go ahead and kill me. I'm ready to go." What is your thought patterns on that, being an educator?
I think he absolutely was mentally ill. you know, Anyone who can do things like that, the things that he did, is, sick. And if he came up for parole, David, and I'm not perfect, so I'll just say this: I probably wouldn't want him getting out because, man, I might say that because I live a couple states away, but I got to think about his neighbors too.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But I just don't believe in this whole evil thing. I mean, I do believe there's evil, but I don't think that you can just assign it to someone like that. I think he was mentally ill, and he probably was really glad when the guy put him out of his misery. I can't imagine what it would have been like being inside his brain. And the girl in my story, because I read enough about her, she really did not show any remorse afterwards, which is a scary thing. You can take someone's life like that and then not care. To me, that's the scariest kind of person that there is. But I do believe she was mentally ill as well. Yes.
Well, it's kind of like in some studies that I've done and some cases that I've done and yet to do. I looked that up, right? Because a lot of your serial killers or killers in general, they don't. BTK comes to mind because when he finally got caught, when you watched him confess his crimes, it was like reading a book, right? There was like no feeling, no empathy. It was just like another day in the park. And from the studies I've done, it's like they're missing that part of their brain that the rest of us has that will trigger an emotion, right? So if you and I was to go and kill somebody right now for no reason, guilt would set in, right? We believe in karma. It would probably eat at us to the point to where maybe we got to tell somebody, and that's our own demise. With these people, and like your character in your book, they're so far off that spectrum because of the mental illness that they have, maybe the traumas that they have faced in their previous life, they just don't have any sympathy. And I'm on the other side of that spectrum. I've always been one to say, I'm with you. If Jeffrey Dahmer would have lived and came up for parole, if that was to happen, I would be the first one to say, I don't think he should ever be out again. But I don't necessarily agree either that maybe a prison was the right place for him. For some of these people, you need to put them in a mental health institution, even if it's for life, to get them the help that they need. Putting them into the system is not helping them. In a lot of ways, it's hurting them. So I'm glad that we kind of see eye to eye on that because that's the stance I always take, and I preach that whenever I get a chance.
And I wish I was more of a big thinker type person. I'm not. People ask me sometimes what I think about like the major issues, and I'm always so conflicted. I wish I knew a lot of these things, but I feel like at least I know that I don't know. And I feel like that's a good place to be. Some people just like to have an opinion, so they have one. I'd rather not have one than one that I genuinely feel. So that way I'm still open to learning about things. And, with Xander and Dawn, what happened was, not to spoil the ending or anything like that, but like I said, her father was a billionaire and she got a slap on the wrist. And she was, David, this is going to make you sick. She was convicted of manslaughter which means without the intention to kill. And my question is, how do you stab someone 50 times in the body without intending to kill them? But the expensive attorney sprinkled like holy water all over her, and she was out. And then jurors with David. Now, David was middle class and Hispanic. So I saw some race coming into this too. But then jurors finally were like, well, wait a minute. If we're not going to get to hear her side of the story, and those are the only two living people who were actually there that night, then we're never going to get the true story. So he got manslaughter too. So the only person who really lost, two people, was the guy who got killed and his mom. And I'll never forget her picture in the newspaper the day that was announced. She looked like there was creases in her skin from the stress. You could have collected dust in the creases of her face. And she looked shattered. And I just thought, this is sickening. What a miscarriage of justice. And granted, the girl is mentally ill, but the way she got off was just like, to me, one of the biggest problems with American justice is it seems like if you have enough money to get a high-priced attorney, you're okay. If you don't, you better follow the letter of the law, because you're gonna find out the hard way that you're gonna pay the hard way. So that's another thing that bugged me about what happened at the end of the book.
Well, and David got extremely lucky that he had a jury that looked that way, because as you know, that normally doesn't happen.
Right.
I've done a number of cases where, yes, the rich and sometimes the white, they get off. Brown and black people are 2 to 3 times more likely to get convicted of the exact same crime of their white or rich counterpart, and they get sent up the river. So even though I feel like they both should have had harsher sentences,
sure,
this is the danger of money and racism in the world. And part of my platform is trying to eradicate that. Because, I have mixed children. I'm married to a white woman, have been for 20 years. My kids are mixed. They've been raised that no matter what color somebody is, they're still a person. You judge that person from what they do and their character. Color of skin to me don't mean anything. But when you get into this justice system, that's exactly what happened. And that's what led when I did the case of Christopher Dorner. That opens up to racism within our own police force.
By the way.
What's that?
That was excellent. I loved your podcast.
Oh, thank you very much. We see out a lot of things, and I'm glad you wrote that. With the stigmatism that goes around mental health, did you have any reluctance to write Don as a mentally ill person?
Well, from what I got from the court documents and from what I learned, and I interviewed a lot of different psychologists in New York City. One thing about New York City, there's a lot of psychologists, accountants and psychologists. There's more of those guys than roaches. All right. So, and a lot of them, when I told them what I was doing, they were willing to give me like informational interviews. And when I asked them, what do you think of the girl? You want to talk about 10 out of 10. They were all like, she's a sociopath. She shows no compunction or compassion for her deeds, and it's very scary. So that's partly why I had the main character be a psychologist, because I got so much information from these psychologists that I was like, all right, this is perfect. He's going to be their psychologist. That part is obviously fictional. They didn't have the same psychologist, but I needed a way to weave the two characters together. And I needed a way for the main character to kind of find out what happened that night, which he does at the very end of the book. But I of course, I was sensitive to it, but I felt like I did my due diligence in researching it as much as I could. So I pretty much just wrote what I thought after a lot of research.
Well, it's written very good. It is definitely a twisting book. It's also a book to make you think about it. I'm glad that you did allude to the fact that it is wrapped in a true story. To me, that gives it more bite, right? Because even though the names may have been changed, I know that I'm reading something that pertained to somebody that's real. So the opinion and review that I give will be as real, right? So whether I think that they served enough time or whatever the case is, from reading Don, I think that she should be in some kind of mental health institution for the rest of life. She should never walk the street again, because if she does, she may do the same thing again.
She's alive and well in Manhattan. I see little articles on her from time to time. One thing about New York City, they don't forget stuff. They don't forget stuff. And whenever she pops up, there's a story about her, because that really shocked and sickened New York City. And David, that's not an easy thing to do. There's been enough, you're LA, this is the same type thing. They're pretty hardened to stuff. But the way this guy was killed, and the fact that it was 15-year-olds, and then that they get off, it's very hard, I think, for the whole city to wrap their mind around what happened. And it still is, probably.
So again, guys, if you haven't read this book, go out and grab yourself a copy of Dawn Webb. We're going to get all the information to you. Definitely pick it up over at Genius Books. What's next in the pipeline for you, Patrick?
Well, it's what the book is right now is more like magical realism. And I was reading Lord of the Rings, which is one of my favorite things of all time. And this hobbit named Pippin looks in a crystal ball and is terrified at what he sees. So it's a girl who thinks what she's got is a paperweight that's just been discarded. She has it in her room, but she starts seeing visions in the paperweight, and it takes a hold of her life. And it's a sinister force in the paperweight that's sort of changing her. And it's going to be her working her way out of this sort of addiction to the sinister being in the paperweight.
Sounds interesting.
Without her knowing it, it's a crystal ball.
So when can we expect to have that come out?
Well, like I said, it takes me a while. I'm on about page 100, and you know me, I'm not going for 400. I'd say in about a year and a half.
Well, it would definitely be something I would look forward to for sure. Like I said, man, you've built yourself a fan base out here. They're all clamoring, waiting for you to release something new. What would you like to say in closing to all of your readers, fans, and students out there?
Well, thank you, first of all. And David, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. This is obviously my first, and it's a wonderful experience talking with you, and you're a really cool guy, and we do see eye to eye on a lot of things, which is nice. I'd say mainly, though, to the people who are aspiring writers, don't let anybody tell you no. Don't ever let anybody kill your dream. If you feel inside you need to write, then you're a writer, and do it. And tell those dream killers to take a hike. Don't take no for an answer. Keep writing.
Well, Patrick, I thank you for coming on the show. Anytime you want to come back, let me know. After you write your next book, we'll be happy to have you come back on the show. Thank you for everything you've done. Thank you for this wonderful book. Also, thank you for what you've done in the field of education. It is greatly appreciated.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, guys, well, you heard it there. That was the amazing Patrick Shattuck, teacher, author. Be sure you go check out his book, Dawn's Web. You can get it at Genius Books, also at Amazon. I will leave links to both of those down in the show notes. And you can also find them on his page on my website at truecrimeandauthors.com. Once again, thank you to Genius Books. You guys have been amazing. You guys have many more authors coming from that publisher. Make sure you check them out at Genius Books as well. Their information will be down in the show notes. All right, guys, I hope you guys are being safe out there, taking care of yourself. Always remember these things. Always stay humble. A little love and compassion goes a long way. And this is the podcast where two passions becomes one. I'll catch you guys in the next one.
Thank you for listening to True Crime and Authors. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. Join us on social media. On Facebook at True Crime and Authors. On Twitter at Authors True. On YouTube and TikTok at True Crime and Authors. And email at truecrimeandauthors@gmail.com. Cover art and logo designed by Dazzling_Ray from Fiverr. Sound mixing and editing by David McClam. Intro script by Sophie Wild from Fiverr. And I'm the voice guy, your imaging guy from Fiverr. See you next time on True Crime and Authors.